Many Constant Worlds is a meta-disjointed journey through the Dark Tower series by Stephen King. I am Kat, she, her, and I am joined this week by a special guest while Taryn recovers from surgery. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Meghan, she, her, and I am honored to be here. I am a little anxious about what I have to contribute, but also I'm a girl with thoughts.
We love a girl with thoughts. We stan a girl with thoughts.
Thank goodness.
Especially when it comes to Stephen King, who I don't always think he thinks about girls have thoughts.
Fair.
We fully support trigger warnings and taking care of your own mental health. And this is a book about writing. At first, I was like, I don't need any trigger warnings. But then I went online and yeah, I do. So I'm going to give you the trigger warnings for this book and thus this episode. Car accident, injury detail, medical content, substance use, substance dependence, cursing, death of a parent, racial slurs, cancer, alcohol, vomit, medical trauma, blood, bullying, death, gore, mental illness, sexism, and terminal illness are the things that people in Storygraph have pegged this book for.
I co-signed all of that, having had to read it.
I do appreciate that you were willing to read a book for the podcast. Part of the reason we asked you to fill in is because you do have a degree in literature, so I trust you when it comes to writing.
Can I just add a disclaimer? That degree was gained 20 some odd years
so what?
ago.
You did the fucking work. You need to take pride in that.
Okay. So true, but also disclaimer added.
Well, and I think that writing in general it's interesting because reading this, everybody always talks about what a great writer Stephen King is. And I make the joke all the time. What you learn from having a Stephen King podcast is that he's not that good of a writer. But that's not even quite true. He's just a very normal writer. And I think we have blown him up into this gigantic guy.
So I have to confess that as I've been going through the pages of this journey, I have certainly struggled, and my poor boyfriend has, God bless, doing the Lord's work, this man, in listening to my just shy of absolute ravings. For instance, the trigger warnings you just rattled off about a book that is on writing. I have noticed some things that I think Stephen King comes out with and just owns outright, which I always appreciate in a fellow human. Self-awareness is a beautiful friggin' thing.
It is.
And then I think he's like all of us in that the things we don't say that we maybe aren't self-aware about or don't realize about ourselves, I think certainly also come across the page. I personally have not read Stephen King up until this point. That has been a very conscious choice. The genre is not my lane, as well as I can say just from this book, his writing style friggin' irks the shit out of me. And so let's talk about that some more.
Valid. So we did read on writing, but we read through the mini forwards up until the section titled on writing.
Which, wait, you don't get to until page 141.
Yeah. It doesn't matter what edition, because technically we are sitting here with two different editions. I've got the 20th anniversary. Meghan has the original paperback that came out, which basically the difference between them is a couple of letters, I believe, from his kids getting included in the 20th anniversary one. But they're on the same page. So
not that different.
Not that different. We should have read the same things, I think. Fingers crossed. I guess we're going to find out.
We are, in fact.
It's a little harder to summarize this, but basically the first half of this book is several forwards about why King wrote this book, then a mini biography of his life and how it related to writing, very reminiscent of Wendy's recounting of hers and Jack's relationships, but through beds. We definitely get a peek behind the curtain to where some of the common themes and experiences come from within King's work. Not that it's a huge surprise, given my super ego thesis of this podcast, which you listen.
I have indeed. I know exactly what you speak of.
Yeah. Meghan knows. She's plugged in. She's awesome like that.
Oh, I live and breathe this podcast.
Needless to say, King did have a rough go of things. His father bouncing when he was a kid, his mother doing her best to raise him, and his brother being a freaking genius, and King himself obviously being a bright man, pun absolutely intended. We see that a young Steve wrote for many papers, sold short stories to support himself and his family, and of course the infamous Carrie saved by his partner Tabitha. Then we get around to what we actually thought was going to be getting into this book, which is writing advice. It starts with a metaphorical toolbox, and I assume the other half of the book will tell us how to use said toolbox.
I'd just like to point out, we don't get to the toolbox until 108 bleepity bleepin pages in. Just want to throw that out there.
Yeah, it took a while to reach the toolbox. There are some fire quotes through here about writing and frankly about life. This book really does go in on reminding you just how human King is, because at this point, there are copies of the first edition of The Gunslinger selling for thousands of dollars on eBay. I think it's easy to forget just how human he is, that he is just some dude who wrote in his spare time, drank beers on Friday, and had to live in shitty apartments before he hit it big. Does that put me at ease to listen to him more? Probably a little bit. I do imagine that was the intention of telling me all the weird ass shit in his life, especially because we're doing this right in the middle of The Shining. And now, holy fuck, do I have a lot of thoughts on The Shining?
So as a person who has not read all of his stuff, I absolutely wanted to pick your brain about context and information and setting, and just listening to your current podcast of The Shining, how he references his addiction issues, and that it was, he gives the list of books that were written in the midst of that. And I just thought, oh shit, Kat has some like whole new world thoughts on this.
A little bit, especially because he's saying like he didn't realize he was writing himself in The Shining. Like, that is wild to me, because I think reading these books here in the 2020s, even the first time I read The Shining, which I was probably like, I want to say I was 16, so early 2000s, many, many years after it came out, we already know these things about him, and I think there's just this assumption like, well, he must have been self-aware. In reality, it doesn't sound like he was. At least by his own words, he was not self-aware.
I found that a common theme throughout this reading exercise. Dear listeners, I've already bitched to poor Kat about this offline. I don't understand if it's a joke, if I'm just not getting the joke, if it's a complete lack of self-awareness, or if it's a little like tongue-in-cheek wink. And I think it's the middle one, where it's a lack of like self-awareness, because he'll say one thing and then immediately proceed to do the very thing he swore he wasn't going to do. And it starts from the very beginning. So for me, and you can attest to this because I believe I called you and lost my shit a little bit about, he goes on and on in the very introduction of the book about how most books people write about how to write are bullshit, and they fill the pages with utter bullshit. And he, Stephen King, is not going to do that. And the way he's not going to do that is by keeping the book short, so to minimize the amount of bullshit that could seep in. And so I am not exaggerating when I say to you, I held this book that you curated for me, thank you, in my hand and looked at it and went, seriously? And I flipped to the last page, and his version of minimalist to avoid bullshit is 288 pages. So then, me being the mom of a 9-year-old who loves graphic comic novel style books was like, maybe there's a shit ton of pictures. So I start flipping just through the no pictures either. So he either is joking, ha, I'm going to make this short, wink, wink, so that there is less bullshit for the reader to get through, or I'm so full of bullshit, but I can't see it because it's mine. Look, I am the last one to throw stones in that department. I think we all suffer from a little bit of that, but what made it particularly blatant was that then you sit through not 1, not 2, not 3, but I want to say 4 forwards.
I think so. I know there's quite a few forwards.
And I was like, wait, you just said, and you lied, and now I don't trust anything I'm about to read in this book. Now, maybe I'm exaggerating. Maybe there's only 3.
There are 3 forwards,
okay.
and then we finally get the CV, which is just a biography, after he says, I'm not going to just write a biography.
Which is exactly what he does, and bless his heart, I felt like and I've had an avid, heated discussion with my 9-year-old about this, about writing in books. And I said to her, I only write in the books I buy. And this is why I don't get this book from the library. I need to write in it. I need to interact in it. So that was a funny. And then my boyfriend as well said, oh, it's like sacrosanct to me to like the book. I don't write in my books. And that was wild to me. So perhaps I'm the vandalistic asshole here. But for me, I leave a piece of me in the book as I'm experiencing every book in this moment right now. I scribble a part of me into it, whether it's my reaction, whether it's a response, whether it's something that it triggers for me that I've lived in my life, because then a year from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, if I pick that book back up, it's not just the book, it's also how I experienced it the last time.
Yeah.
And I love that. So yeah, I'm that asshole. I'm going to scribble and mark my books up. And I did it to this one unapologetically.
Yeah, no, that is what we do here at Many Constant Worlds.
I'm so relieved because the rest of the world was not with me.
It was hard at first when we started this over a year ago. Like, okay, I want to make sure to like really do this up right now. Like, I get copies with that intent. Like, if I have a copy that I want to keep nice and pretty, I set it to the side because I actually have a hardbound copy of the same book. I'm not going to do that to that.
Oh, heavens, no.
Right here, I actually dug out my Bachman book. It's in shit condition, but that book right there is out of print. And it's got a story that he has taken out of print.
Gotcha.
And will not allow to be printed again. Oh. So that crappy edition right there, I could sell on eBay for like $100, but I'm not touching it either.
Yeah.
I don't know that we will read that story for this podcast since he has removed it. My assumption is it's a decanonized. But yeah, so I get copies specifically for even you that, write up in it. Now, writing in it is still a thing I struggle with. So I have these like transparent
tabbies. Do you use Post-it notes?
Yes, but they're clear so I can do whatever I want in the pages without like shame. But I do at least highlight now.
You would be appalled. And I have one of those silly pens. I stole it from my daughter. That's like 5 colors that you push the color down and you get the different color ink. So it's not even consistent. It's like one page will be in red, the next page will be in purple, and then I got on a real green streak here in the middle. I don't know why. I think these are probably the chunks I read them in. And so I don't want to say it's careless, but it is, as he describes, it is that first draft that's for me. This was not my rewrite. This was my first draft that is purely for my enjoyment, my soaking it in and responding and reacting to it. And I didn't do the rewrite. Maybe this is my rewrite right here.
I mean, this is the part that's for the public. Yeah. And if we go by his
definition
tools there, yes, the first version was for you. And then there's what you bring here. Because, I take notes off to the side on everything we read. Not everything makes it into the script. It's just this is stuff that maybe it'll make it in, maybe it won't, maybe we'll revisit this later. I think that writing in books is okay as long as you're okay with it. And it's not something that's going to bother you down the line. No, don't take a special edition.
Oh, heavens no. But if it's a book and it's something, I think I learned it from school. I think in school when I had points or things I wanted to come back to, the best way to do that, I dog ear my books too, which I know again is sacrilege, but I treat my books like they're an entity, not a thing that I have to It's like the difference between really nice, beautifully decorated houses with fancy china and things that a klutz and not graceful human like myself will bump into and break and then feel terrible about. So I don't even like going in those houses. It stresses me out. Whereas you have my house where it's a little messy. Overall pretty clean, but it's cozy. You can sit down, you can eat on the couch, there's a million throw blankets, there's pillows everywhere. It's a place where you don't have to take your shoes off the second you walk through the door. We're not fancy in that way. And so I think of books and the experience of reading, and I've created that experience to be as cozy as possible. I want to live in my books. And so I scribbled the shit out of them.
I love it. I love it. It also, for me, it makes me engage with the material.
Yes.
I can read a page and forget what I've read. And you know, I have no idea. Whereas, like, if I'm actually, like, looking for making notes and highlighting and writing, and I know what I read.
Absolutely. I think writing it down, it's sort of like when we work with people sometimes in teaching or training or any kind of learning, it's like, take notes. Are you taking notes? If you're not, you should be. And it's not so much that the note itself is important or that you'll reference it, but the hand to paper mechanism makes something in your mind connect and cement in a way that my short-term memory that is gnat-ish really needs in the world these days.
Fair.
So I did a lot of writing and it felt good. I haven't honestly dug into a book like that. I've done reading for pleasure or reading in my field, but I have not read and engaged in this way since school, I think, which again, billion years ago, people.
But
so
it feels nice.
Yeah.
It
It
feels
was really
nice.
good to get back to.
Yeah, that's honestly, I think what I enjoy most about this podcast and doing this podcast is that it's like, I have not read a book where I really engaged with the book, even when I have read for pleasure. Just like, oh yeah, no, I really enjoy that book. Or like there's one book by Haruki Murakami that I've read multiple times. And it's because every time I read it, I figure out something else about it. I still don't know entirely what happens in this book. It's so weird. But it is nice to
get into the layers.
Think.
Yeah.
Because once you become an adult, you don't spend a lot of time really thinking. You do everything more like by habit.
I don't think you get into thinking about things that aren't required.
Yeah.
So I think a lot at work. I think a lot about parenting stuff. I think about how to show up and be the best partner or friend that I have the bandwidth for. I think in therapy and post-therapy about some stuff. But when it comes to thinking about a creative outlet, thinking about something that engages my brain that does not have a productive use, it's sort of the same reason I love cut flowers. It is one of, I think, it is the gift that makes me the absolute giddiest. And it is because it serves no purpose other than to make you smile. It's going to die. You didn't plant it. You're not going to have a garden at the end. It is a finite amount of time that you get to just enjoy the beauty, the smell, the gift of it, and then it's gone. And I sort of think reading in this way is similar. I'm not going to get graded on this. No. Podcast people, don't you dare. Not trying. Don't want that. Go take your red pens elsewhere, please. I got to read it because it was something fun that I got to do in that creative outlet world that doesn't have a productive end. It doesn't have a purpose. It's not a drive to a lengthier goal. It is just momentary and for me. And to engage in something in that space was very special. So thank you for that and making that happen.
I love it. And you know what? That's kind of what this book is sort of about. I think eventually we'll get to it. I don't know. We spent a long time on his biography, and then like we get to his toolbox. But how do you feel about his toolbox?
Oh my gosh, I have so many thoughts. Can we start with the CV? Because Mother of God.
Yeah, let's start with the CV.
I get it. I get the picture he's painting. I get that he grew up very poor. I get that his dad was not around. As you touched on, his brother was exceptionally smart. I get that he was the younger brother and tagged along and got into some not great situations, had not great babysitters. His mom did her best, but again, they're dirt poor, and they're two boys who are going through the revolving door of babysitters and some really, like, as a mother, reading some of the situations this child was put in, and his matter-of-fact, dry way of writing about it, which I, throughout the book, came to realize was not him making light of his trauma. I think it's just his style of explaining a thing.
And some of his trauma.
It took me a long time in this book to come to terms with that. I've certainly done some ranting about that style and the topics that are applied in this book under that style that I have had out loud what the fuck moments too. The babysitter the last one who was so jovial, who, I mean, you heard all the trigger warnings. It's not good. It's just, good. It's some really terrible shit.
Made me think of Annie from Misery.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
So I'm like, oh, okay.
I think that some of that came from that space. Now, look, I appreciate any author or any human being. I have been on the dating scene, and any human that sits across the table from you and is willing to be vulnerable about their experience in life, I think is an incredible gift that we are not entitled to. And I think that as a famous person, which I think Stephen King certainly is, he's not just an author, he is a prolific author that has become quite famous. Now, he's not reclusive in his fame. He doesn't necessarily shy away from it. He's quite active on social media. I've actually gotten a kick out of following him on Twitter when I was still a part of that verse and no longer. But the CV for me, I struggled with because the premise, the expectation of this book is on writing. And so the CV, well, I saw little seed plantings of this is who I was, this is where I came from. This isn't to tell you how to be a magical writer. This is a story about how a writer was made, this writer. I didn't find any of it applicable until we get to where his brother has developed his own printing press and has created his own newspaper. And then it is about Stephen's experience getting involved in that with his brother and the pieces that he could do, and then he's making his own. He's creating a riff off of his school's yearbook and making fun of the teachers and using different names and monikers, but making it very obvious who he's referring to. And he's writing his own stories and then printing them on the janky printing press in the basement and taking them to school and selling them, and then getting in trouble for the god-awful things he's wasting his talents on. Sort of same, what's funny to me, and I hate to diminish anyone's experience, but in this book, he himself says that, I got the impression, and I think he says it explicitly, the greatest sin in writing to this man is to be predictable. The CV to me was very fucking predictable.
Yeah.
We all have our origin story. Within it is some trauma, some fucked up experiences that have helped form our fucked up worldviews. While it was incredibly brave of him to share those things, I thought I was reading a book on writing.
To be fair, I thought I was too. I was waiting for the writing to start.
That was it exactly for me. And so it's hysterical because there's one point where he gets a job, and it didn't even sound like it was a job that he wanted. It was just a job he was sort of forced into.
Oh, with the city paper or something like that?
Yeah. And there's this man who's his boss, I think. John Gold. So John Gold goes through Stephen King's first draft that he writes for some paper. And John Gold comes out and says, as he's critiquing it, when you write a story, you're telling yourself the story. When you rewrite, your main job is taking out all the things that are not the story. And then John Gold says something else interesting on that day. And it's your stuff starts out just being for you, in other words, but then it goes out. And once you know what the story is and you get it right, or as right as you can, it belongs to anyone who wants to read it. And I wrote, did John Gold write a book on writing? Because I'm 57 pages in, and I am unsure of how this informed any of Stephen King's writing. I can see the germination of how he starts to become a writer. I can see that it's something that he's passionate about. I can see childhood trauma and god-awful things that have happened to this man. I can see that he's had a rough go of things. But what I don't see is fucking nuggets like this that are inspiring, that make sense, that as someone who has not flexed that muscle in a while but loves language and loves to write, this is what I was thirsty for. And it continued to be a drought for a lot of these pages. Also, and I would love to hear your take on this, Stephen King was a bit of a condescending ass from time to time.
Yeah, he is.
There are in these moments of, it's almost like a humble brag. Like, I'm going to try and be modest. But as one of the most prolific writers of da-da-da-da-da, like, he just throws in these things where he is not only aware but embraces labels of popularity or acclaim or renownedness, that it's like, you're in the midst of telling me a story about how poor you are. Can you, like, put a pin in that? Also, yes, I know, or I wouldn't be reading this mother trucking book. Although, seriously, if John Gold wrote a book, I would like to read that one, because the 2 nuggets of his that were in this book is what kept me going.
So I would say that, yes, he is very condescending, but I feel that way sometimes about most people. And
no.
Honestly, about his work in a lot of times, I feel like the writer character that he writes repeatedly,
yes,
is always a little condescending, if not a lot condescending. Because, like, Bill was in it, Jack 100% is.
See, I couldn't tell, to be honest, not having read those books myself, but just listening to them through the podcast, if that was the tone of the author behind it, or if those are just the male archetype figures that are D-bags.
I honestly think that it's both.
Sure.
Because he does come to the realization that he was writing himself in The Shining. It's bizarre to me that he didn't catch it sooner, but he was writing himself, and Jack is one of the most just condescending assholes of everything we have read to this point.
So in this book, though, the level of condescension, and if I'm to understand his timeline, he has been clean and dealt with, or is dealing with, his addictions.
Yes.
We're in the CV section, and he says, let's get one thing clear right now, shall we? There's no idea dump, no story central, no island of the buried bestsellers. Good story ideas seem to come quite literally from nowhere, sailing at you right out of the empty sky. 2 previously unrelated ideas come together and make something new under the sun. Your job isn't to find these ideas, but to recognize them when they show up. And I'm not going to lie, I wrote in bright purple pen to that very first sentence, let's get one thing clear right now, shall we? This sounds like an old Sunday school marm who's yelling at a student who's just overstepped some boundary. To which my response was, who the fuck asked? That was my general gut check response. And by the way, you're the jackass who decided to write a book on writing. So even though I didn't ask, and honestly, that wasn't my expectation, coming up with, you provide me with the magical recipe for coming up with ideas. I'm sort of a creative broad all on my own. The way that it's said to the reader, as though I'm a toddler that just got patted on my head and poo-pooed for whatever thing I've bumped into or mess I've made. Let's get one thing clear right now. You're not allowed to touch Uncle's blah blah blahs. I don't give a fuck. I didn't try to touch your shit. Why are you talking to me like this? And then at the end, where he says, your job isn't to find these ideas, but to recognize them when they show up. My job? I don't think I like your tone, is what I wrote at the end of this page. I don't know if maybe I'm just not his usual audience. So I'm not reading this book to come to some magical land where Stephen King shows me the way. I'm not the fangirl wanting your autograph when you show up at a book signing for something that's that eager creative writing student. And as my dear boyfriend pointed out, maybe these are things he's really accustomed to getting asked. Maybe he has run into this over and over again, which is what helped frame why he said it in the first place. So I accept that maybe I'm just not his intended audience, but as the person that I am showing up and reading this book, you irked the fuck out of me. I don't think I like your tone, sir.
I think that that's valid. I also will say, I think that what we have learned from reading books for a podcast and engaging in it more is that you read it differently now. First of all, you read it slower.
Okay.
Second of all, like we joke, did we read it wrong? Because neither Tara nor I liked it.
Sure.
But you go online and it most people would put it as like their best. It's his best book. And it's like, I don't think it is. It's not that good. It's really not that good of a book. There are moments in it that are quite good. But because we're sitting here and we're like analyzing everything as we're reading, you kind of like lose that like, I'm just casually reading a book and I'm ignoring the parts where, hey, yeah, that was kind of not so good. And I just remember this really great scene in this portion, and it's like, yeah, but what about all of these ones? Do you remember those ones where they weren't written so good?
So you're taking it in a much more critical eye.
Yes.
That makes sense.
I do wonder if some of that is this as well, of like, he writes that way, but if you're yes, you are a fan of Stephen King so much that you want to know about his life, because I do think he could just write a straight autobiography and it would sell millions of copies.
Sure. Did the tone in that bother you at all, or is this just me and how it landed for me?
No, I mean, I don't love it. I don't love the way that he tends to just like...
If you want to talk to me, the reader, talk to me. I'm right here. I am ready and willing to engage with you. And I am honestly curious. Yeah. I'm showing up maybe not as a super fan, but I am absolutely open and curious until you start talking to me like I'm a toddler.
No, and I think that's fair, because like, that is obviously, this is a fictional character. That's very how like Paul talks about his readers and shit like that. Of just like being kind of an asshole about it all the time, and it's not very like pleasant. Paul still does not deserve to be tortured like he was, but he was still an asshat.
So the podcast listeners won't know this, but you and I talked at length about Misery, and I found myself borderline appalled that there was quite a lot of that podcast where I was rooting for Annie, which I recognize that my moral system is not identifying the correct villain in that story. But the bad guy was less displeasing in a lot of ways than the protagonist you're supposed to want to get away.
Yeah.
I was honestly really apathetic to what happened to that guy, because he was sort of awful in a different and honestly more irritating way.
Yeah. I think that even in Paul Sheldon, we see a lot of Stephen King, and I think we see the same guy who wrote that line that bothers you there, because we get to, at some point in this, he's talking about how he didn't like Carrie White. He did not like the character Carrie White. And that is Paul Sheldon's thing, is he hates Misery. He does not like that character. And so he was thrilled to get rid of her. And then eventually he kind of learns to like embrace it. Like, no, this is something that I could enjoy if I let myself enjoy what I am doing. But I fucking hate Misery. He doesn't like Carrie White. Can
we talk about that section, please?
Absolutely.
Because that was the single most challenging thing up to the point where we read for me. I feel like I'm making a disclaimer for myself here. I want to say that, of course, authors should be allowed to explore territory beyond what they've lived. Otherwise, all the books that are ever written are going to be boring as shit. We should be able to extend beyond our own personal experience and write of things that we may not have personally walked. Now, with that, I love that you talked about how he didn't like Carrie. He was very open about that. His wife is actually the one who prompted him to keep going. He had started with an idea about a girl being bullied in the bathroom and other girls throwing tampons and pads at her, which he has an oddly graphic way of writing in a way that is as displeasing and unpleasant as possible. So talking about how they're all throwing those things at her and yelling, "Plug it up," because she's on her period. And taking that, and just like he said, rather like an asshat, taking that idea and melding it with the idea of telekinesis and what that story would look like. And I think he said he started the first 50 pages and then set it down and didn't like Carrie and didn't really like having to be in that space, I think. And his wife was the one who found it and sort of gave him more context and explained to him that, no, you don't have to have the machines in the girls' bathroom. Don't take quarters because they don't want girls to have to deal with menstruating without supplies if they forgot their quarter that day. And was sort of his encouragement, as well as, I think, a reference guide for some of that teenage girl experience. Yay, wife, way to be supportive and encourage him down a different path. What really irked me was he talks very specifically about 2 young women who had been bullied in his school. And he speaks to their bullying in that same really dry, really matter-of-fact way. Yeah. And he talks about the one girl trying to break out of the cycle and showing up to school in different clothes with her hair done and a smile and a different air about her. And how basically the bullies just continued to bully her, but even more so because how dare she try and come out of her lane. And look, that happens. That is a real life experience for a lot of children in school, unfortunately. What pissed me off beyond belief was that he then talks about the end of these women's lives. Yeah. One woman gets married, has a couple kids, and then dies by a self-inflicted gunshot wound to the abdomen. And he makes some comment at the end about, oh, I guess she was lucky or unlucky because she hit a major vein or artery and died. And then the other woman dies alone from an epileptic seizure, and there was no one there to catch her or help her when her head fell the wrong way from a seizure. This is just an assumption on my part. But you probably didn't know these women as adults.
It doesn't seem like he did.
You don't know who they were, other than how they died. And your jackassery appropriated their pain for your benefit, for your inspiration. And in death, you couldn't let them be something other than who they were in high school. It was such a confining box. Here was the box you were in at 15 probably. I didn't know you. I didn't know how your life went. I didn't know what happened to you. But I'm going to just keep you in that box till the end of days. And that was the box that best served me. And he had the right to do that. This is his book. He can write whatever the fuck he wants. But to channel someone else's experience, to have the kind of suffering that he's talking about, and to have it done in what is his typical dry, matter-of-fact writing style, the compassionate marshmallow inside me was screaming with rage. You couldn't just leave the part of them as adults in death out. You couldn't just let them perhaps be figures beyond what they were at 15 years old. I don't know if that struck you at all.
No, I was bothered by that too. I'm like, why did you need to include this part to basically tell me that shit still sucked for them?
Yeah.
Like, we could have just... You made up names anyway. You could have just left them as a foggy memory in your head.
Yes. See, I'm almost relieved that it bothered someone else. Yeah. Because it felt so callous and for something you took from. You took from that, but you didn't give anything. Yeah. And you didn't show any grace or compassion or kindness. And fuck, I don't expect most 15-year-old boys to do that. That's not a thing, typically. But I would expect a grown man writing this book now to have some sort of care and tenderness towards the subjects, especially when what you made of it was such a pivotal turning point. So yeah, that particular passage about that, it irked me.
That's valid. I wonder what would have changed then if he were to have written those parts after his accident. Because this book was slated to come out in like 2000, but he says that he's writing it in 97 and his accident's in 99. Oh. So what might have been different if he were to sit down and rewrite this section right now after having his own like massive thing, because a lot in his writing started to alter after he nearly died.
So what changes did you see in his other works?
So I would say he seems to be a little bit more like right now, currently in his current writing, he tends to be edging away from like the horror genre. He's going more into like the crime thriller area, because like Holly, his most recent like full novel was a spinoff from a character in one of his other like books, which was more of a crime novel. He's kind of shifting that way.
Okay.
And less in this like horror is so hard to say with him in the first place because some of his shit just isn't horror.
So I'm curious about that because I know you've said that before. What to you defines, I don't want to use typical, but what falls into like a mainstream horror genre for you? What are the components?
At this point, this is not a thing that I enjoy, but at this point it is like body horror. I'm not a fan of body horror and gore. Like it's fun. Like I'm not like somebody who's like, oh, I'm squeamish about it.
Oh, you're
it's
funny.
just
I
boring.
fully am.
It's like what the fuck is the point? I'm bored. Please get on with the story.
It doesn't move anything along. It's just there for their sake.
Generally, some level of a mystery does have to be playing in because, you know, if you know why the crazy slasher killer is coming after you, then you probably know how to deal with that.
Okay.
So you have to go through the course of the story to find out why is the crazy slasher killer coming for you.
Got it. And also that provides a through line.
Yes, exactly. Okay. So some level of a mystery. And then I do think you need a strong, like, villain or, like, just that character. You need the crazy slasher.
Got it.
Or the ghost or the monster, whatever the fuck the thing is. And I would say like modern horror in particular really focuses on psychological horror, which is why generally it's just the main fucking character. I'm not a fan of psychological horror either at this point. I'm so inundated with it, but I would say those things.
So if you were to give a synopsis of the book we're reading, to the point that we have read it, how would you sell this book?
To the point that we have read this, I would say if you wanted to learn more about Stephen King and where he got his ideas, you're going to find them in at least the first half of this.
I agree. I think my synopsis would be right along those lines. It would be like, for fans of Stephen King, this is a lot of insight into his childhood, who he is, the man, and how some of that childhood and adulthood informed the stories and characters you've come to know and adore. I don't think it's a universal appealing tale. Ooh, can we talk about after 111 or 17 pages or something of his, quote, CV, which that's a resume, right?
I was of the impression that a CV is some form of a like resume. Now they are generally longer so you can explain why you have the credentials to do the thing, but they're not like this long. No. This is obscene.
I thought that was very funny that that's how that was referenced.
Yeah.
I would have appreciated even like a biblical in the beginning reference or something, because that's how it felt. If you've ever actually sat down and read the Bible, when you get to so-and-so begot so-and-so begot so-and-so, sometimes it felt like, okay, this is... Stephen King did a TV show of This Is Your Life and put it to paper, and this was his life. And honestly, the dry, matter-of-fact writing style of some of the horrific subject matter that's included in these pages was not jarring in a way that was unpredictable, which really is, I think, the greatest sin for him in writing, being predictable. Yeah. It was jarring in a way that was really fucking sad. Have you processed this? It is almost like...
The answer is no, he has not. At least not at the time that he sat down at his desk and wrote those. Maybe he did later.
Sure, but like you can tell when you sit down and you're talking to somebody and you hit a button and they make a joke or they have a nervous laugh or they change the subject real quick and you're like, oh, I hit a button you're not ready to dive into. This is a topic that you are in an uncomfortable way telling me is not accessible. And That's okay, but don't put it in a book. Like, why?
That's fair.
Oh, before we move on to the toolbox, page 111, I wanted to ask you, do you notice how much Stephen King brings in sex to his writing?
Yes, I do, and it's...
But not in a fun, sexy way.
Yeah, no, it's not. I'm just like, this is...
And not in a way where it is even appropriate or, again, I think you, sir, are not predictable, but I don't need you to be unpredictable in a way where you throw in a reference to sex that makes me go, wait, what? It's not funny. It's not fun. It's not a turn on. It is simply a reference to sex in an otherwise completely unrelated context.
Yeah, I will say that is one thing that drives me crazy with his writing, because he does it so much, and he did it all through it, obviously. And I get, it's the coming of age story, but it's still just like, oh my God, this is, you are not shocking me. Mm-mm. But am I thinking of that from the 2020 perspective? Would I have been shocked when this came out in, well, not this particular book, but would I have been shocked by it in 85? I don't know. Possibly, I guess. I don't know. I feel like we've gotten so far away, it's hard to tell anymore. I joke all the time that I'm desensitized to horror. That's why I struggle to find horror books I actually want to read. Because it's like, well, this isn't scary anymore. I've read cannibals, and I root for them.
I mean, so it's even... in his, he went and he had to take a shit in the woods, and he wiped his ass with poison ivy.
Yeah.
And he was out with his brother, and his brother told him to man up and go take a shit in the woods, basically. And so even here, he's like, 2 days later, I was bright red from the backs of my knees to my shoulder blades. Okay. Enough said, dude. Yeah. You got a raging case of poison ivy. You were shitting in the woods. I can paint a picture. And then he goes on to say, my penis was spared, but my testicles turned into stoplights. My ass itched all the way up to my rib cage, it seemed. Worst yet of all was the hand I had wiped with. And so, like, he's a little kid in this story.
I don't need this information, sir.
I don't ever want to hear about a child's penis or testicles referenced in... again, that dry matter-of-fact sort of way, but it doesn't make it any less of an ew moment for me.
Yeah.
And this happens not necessarily when he's a little kid telling the story, but over and over again, where for such a renowned storyteller, it has to be a deliberate choice, but I don't understand the choosing of it. I guess that's where I get stuck with that.
I do think it comes from this place of thinking you're shocking people. Because, oh my God, he said penis. Oh my God, he said testicles. And it's like, at this point, like... I don't find myself shocked. I'm annoyed.
Yeah. You've taken me out of the story. You've taken me out of the point you're trying to make, or the tale or life experience you're trying to... Now I have this ick moment, or this... It's not even, like, strong enough to be whiplash, but that, like, oh, did I just see a bird fly in front of my windshield?
Yeah.
And then I'm trying to shake that off and keep driving and move forward through the rest of the story. It's disconcerting, and it happens a lot.
Yeah.
Even in this. Again, a book about writing, people.
You get to hear about a penis. There's always unsolicited dick.
It just happens over and over again. In the most innocuous of places. I don't know if it's that shock value or if it's again, I'm trying to be unpredictable. I don't want to be, that's the death knell of a writer. How could you? That's the last thing you want to do or be.
Which is wild because it's like every story's been told. We just tell it with a new like overlay.
Twist.
It's all the same. It's also there's a comfort in predictability. Like I rewatch the same shows again and again and again. And I do reread some books again because it's comforting to know what's coming.
As well as, I hate to say it, but there are certain life experiences that are so relatable. And those, I would imagine, have to be predictable. The loss of a grief. the solving of a family, having children, whatever those like sort of life experiences are, the whole connective thread is that we've all had them in one way or another. We've all experienced loss. We've all experienced love. We're looking to. And those connective threads do have some air of predictability. I don't need some random kid's penis thrown into the mix just to be jarring. It takes away from it.
We know poison ivy without penises.
Right? I think this is a fairly universal, even if you haven't had it, you know the deal.
Itchy, rashy, gross, don't want it.
Uncomfortable, don't do it.
Yeah, calamine lotion.
I mean, PSA, people, don't shit in the woods and wipe your ass with poison ivy. Enough said. Did I have to reference any anatomical body parts? I did not.
So are you ready for the toolbox?
I'm not only ready, I am mother trucking excited. This was what I thought this book was going to be.
When we finally get to the small amount of writing that happened in this particular episode, it's like 40 pages left at best. I think it's only like 30 something actually. Because also there's like these big pages just to announce that we're going into the toolbox.
Yes.
So that's just not a page at all, really.
I will say, and this is a point of respect that I had for Stephen King. Again, it's condescending as fuck, but I appreciated his point. As we're leading up to the toolbox, he talks about this isn't a popularity contest, it's not the Moral Olympics, and it's not church, but it's writing, damn it. If you take it seriously, we can do business. If you can't or won't, it's time for you to close the book and do something else. And I will say, the one thing that, through the condescension, if you can cut away that nonsense, is a genuine reverence for the craft. It's not even just for the craft, though. It is a commitment to the persistence of writing. I loved the story about his rejection letters. One of my favorite lines in the book is about the optimism. When you are too young to shave, optimism is a perfectly reasonable response to rejection. I thought that was brilliant. I loved his commentary on you have to do the work.
Yes.
I think that was the moral of the story that I took away, that even when he's delivering it in sort of a jackhole manner, I like the message and I believe in it. I think as someone who has written in the past and who loves, I particularly like 90s rap music. I love Eminem. I love Method Man. I love people who play with words. I think it's magic when it can be done well. It takes practice. That's not something 99.8% of the population is going to wake up one day and be good at. And so the diligence and the persistence, I love those parts of his story and him being so blunt about them. If you're unwilling to do it, just stop. Just close up the book, call it a day, and move on. Which, by the way, this was still in the CV section, and I was tempted, but I promised my friend I'd do a podcast. I was like, maybe I will do the work, but I'm just going to say I won't close this damn book. I don't know, did that strike you at all?
No, it did, especially because, like, through the CV, you see him telling the stories about, like, he's working in a laundry, and he's doing this crappy job and that crappy job, and he's still having to force himself to find time
to write.
As people who work full-time jobs and do like writing.
And do like reading and any of the extras.
Yeah, like, it's so hard to find time to be creative and to do shit like that, but you have to put in the work, and it's exhausting. I am going to be editing this episode, and I've got a ton of other episodes I gotta edit. It is exhausting doing anything that isn't just work, and he's doing it with children.
I'd like to just take a moment and put a plug in for the Patreon to help support the people over here doing the work who, yes, do it for the love of it, but also could use some love. Just throwing that out there.
We do appreciate your support, lobsters, and you can follow for free.
Yeah, support the pod.
Yeah,
that's the moral of the story.
Your like presence alone helps.
Your presence is a present.
Yes.
I one time was invited to a wedding where on the invitation, oh gosh, that was the worst wedding I'd ever been to. But on the invitation at the bottom, it said, "Your presence," PRESENCE. I misspelled that, but you know what I mean.
Yeah.
does not merit presents, as in gifts. And I never, to this day, don't know how they meant that. Whether it was your being there is not a gift and you should bring one, or because you've come, that is gift enough and it does not merit you having to bring a gift.
That's a wedding I would not have attended. Well, of course, I don't like weddings, but that's besides the point.
Dear college friend, who, if she had been the one that had made the invitation, it would have never been on there in the first place. But she would have never insisted people bring gifts. Her heart is still, to this day, I'm sure, just gold. She's one of those you just know is heading straight to the good place someday. But it was a challenging day, and that invitation was just the drop of hint of things to come. The wedding started like 4 hours late in Sacramento in the dead of summer.
Oh God! So it just is sweaty. The air is sweating on you.
It's an outside wedding, so everyone's sitting in 110-degree heat in their nice dresses, and the men are taking off their sport coats because they wore nice coats or suits. And I'll never in all of my days forget, as I'm sitting there waiting for a wedding that seemed like it was never coming, one of the bridesmaids comes running out to me and taps me on the shoulder and says, "Your girl needs you." And I thought she meant the bride. And I'm like, "Yeah, I'm coming." I go sprinting because, I'm already sweaty. Who cares? To the back of the house. And it wasn't the bride. It was one of the bridesmaids who I was also dear friends with, who is sobbing hysterically because the mother of the bride had slapped her.
Why?
Oh gosh, this is a long time ago. I think she got the blame for the girls being late coming back from something. But again, physical violence from the mother of the bride upon a bridesmaid. To which I will say, I gave the best damn pep talk of my life. It was incredible. It was something out of Rudy. And to her credit, she got those tears to stop. She dusted herself off and 4 hours later got herself down that aisle with her bouquet of flowers. That was a wild day. Did I mention that? Sorry. Got us a little off the beaten path.
I dig it. Great.
I understand why you don't care for weddings.
Yeah. I'm not a fan of weddings. Y'all go and enjoy your day, but I'm gonna root for people off on the side from home. It's best for everybody involved, trust me. You don't want me bored at your fucking wedding going, why can't I leave?
Kat, do you have the anti-poker face like I do? Will everyone at the wedding know that you'll be sitting there going, I am bored and miserable and I want to leave? Yes, they will.
Yeah, no, probably. Though to be fair, I've been told I have resting bitch face, so I probably look like that all the time anyway.
Oh, that helps. Okay.
Yeah, so I'd never want to be anywhere, which isn't untrue.
I never want to be anywhere. I don't know. I'm really fond of my bed. I like being there.
Yeah, that's fair.
And my couch. My couch is pretty cush. Oh, hot bath. Yeah. Okay. I like to be a few places.
The uniqueness of this event on writing is going to continue in that we are going to actually have a part 2 to this episode. The CV was a lot longer than we had expected, and it was containing a lot more personal info about Stephen King's life. So we really hadn't gotten into the writing portion. So I'm divvying up this episode a little bit, and there will actually be a short mini Fowards part 2 coming out tomorrow, Thursday, September 19th. You can email us at manyconstantworlds@gmail.com, DM us on Instagram, and check out our Patreon. All links can be found in the description of our episodes.
We work really hard for the Patreon, and Megan gets mad if we don't say that.
We work hard for that money.
So hard for that money.